Hello, it's Steve here again from the Studio One SoapBox, and in today's video I want to take a look at drums. I'm not going to do a video on what settings to use or what plugins we should use. That's been done to death on the internet, and there's loads of other stuff available elsewhere. But what I want to do is just discuss some of the ideas when you're given stems of a multi-track drum kit as to what exactly you should be thinking, how you should approach it, and how you can get to a good sounding drum kit that fits your track. So if you listen to this, here we have a kick in, which would be a microphone placed either just inside the drum kit or closer to the beater head. Here we have a kick out, which is probably a microphone placed a little back from the kick drum. Sometimes there'd be a towel put over to help cut out a bit of bleed, something like that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to doing drums, you cannot use this setting or use this plugin because one, we don't know what drum kit was used in the original recording. Two, we don't know what microphones were used in that recording. Three, we don't know what preamps they use. And lastly, we don't know if they used any outboard gear or any plugins on the tracking stage. So it means that everybody that is sent a drum track, multi-track drums, it's going to be completely different. You're going to have to do different EQ moves and a little compression if it's required. And so you can't say, put this EQ curve on your kick drum and voila, you have the best kick drum in the world. It's going to be different every single time. So you need to get into a way of learning what sound of kick drum you're going for, what sound of snare drum you're going for, and then listening in the track and seeing, does that kick drum can it be heard through the track? The same with the snare, same with other things. So if you want to get an initial idea of what a drum kit sounds like, the best place to go to, believe it or not, is your overheads, because these microphones are picking up the sound of the whole kit, and it will give you an idea of what kind of sound you've got, what kind of room it was in, and then you can try and blend in your kick and your snare and try and get a good sound from there. Then working your way on to toms and adding in your room, which a lot of people use simply as a reverb on their drums. If you've got a good sounding room and you blend that in, you may not need any reverb on your drums at all. But it is quite common to throw a reverb on the snare just to help it in a mix. So let's listen to these drums. This is what was sent. Okay, sounds flat, but basically everything's there, and that's the idea of a multi-track drum kit. Having various microphones put across it is to capture every single sound that could possibly be captured, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use every single mic that you've been sent. It's just to get the blend you need, the sound you're after, to go along with the track at hand. So let's mute that and let's just listen to our overheads now. Okay, not bad. I've panned them 60 left, 60 right. Let's bring in our kick in. Gives us a bit of weight. And let's bring in the snare top mic as well. We can hear our toms, even though they're not put on, we can hear our toms kicking through on the overheads. Okay, so let's get into this a bit further. So firstly, what you want to do is decide who will rule the low end, because when it comes to kick drums and bass guitars, they're always wrestling against each other as to who's going to take that low end and then you find you're having to carve one to make room for the other, usually in most cases. So if I add in our two kicks, add in the bass guitar, let's have a listen to that. Now you ask yourself, can I still hear that kick drum? Yep, it's kind of still there, but it could do with a bit of work, definitely. And as the bass guitar is playing there, you can hear he's playing further up the neck. So that kind of decides for you if he's going to be playing high up the neck, then in that section of the song, or if he's like that in the whole song, you would decide then to let the kick drum rule that low end and drive that track along, give it that thump that we all love so much coming out of our speakers. So once you've decided who's going to rule the low end, next we have phase and timing. Now, when you have more than one mic on anything at all, you're always going to have phase and timing issues. The reason being, it depends how far away mics are placed. Sometimes a mic is slightly closer, sometimes a mic is slightly further away, and this can cause a timing issue where the sound, the length of time it takes that sound, say the kick drum for instance, it takes that sound of the kick drum, the initial hit, to hit that microphone and be picked up. There can be a delay between different mics. And again, on drum kits, there's mics of various kinds, from large condensers, even to pencil mics, to classic SM57s on snares and stuff like that. So even on the snare, as here, we have a snare top and a snare bottom. That's usually an SM57 on the top of the drum, on the beater head, and an SM57 on the bottom, on the snares, on the resonant head, trying to pick up those snares. So, there's various programs can be used for this, or as I've showed in an earlier video, if you go and have a look at time adjustment and dealing with phase and delay video, it can show you how to do it manually. But here I've downloaded, if we can get it up, M Auto Align. It's actually cheaper than the more professional one, I would say, is the Sound Radix Auto Align, which a lot of people use. But I find it a bit tricky to use, and I'm all about keeping things simple, because at the end of the day I want to remain focused on the music itself and don't want to be taken over by how do you work this plugin and having to read manuals on plugins. It just distracts you from getting the mix right, and you can go off on a tangent and your mix can suffer because of it. So you want to stay on track. With this one here, as you can see, I've got my kick in and my kick out. So if I just mute all the drums, bring in the two kicks, and I'll turn these two on. And all you do is you put these on your track, you have your drums playing, and while it's playing back, you just simply click Analyze, and this M Auto Align plugin is like about a third of the price of Auto Align, so definitely worth having. Take a wee look into it. There's other ones available. This is just the one I like because this is how it works. Play the drums, click Analyze, and there you go, 17 samples, one of them is out by, let's see which one. Is it yep, the kick in. Let's try the kick out. As you can see, no change on that whatsoever. And this inverse is a phase reverse. Should something be out of phase? As you can see, it hasn't brought it in here. And if we turn those both off, let me click this. Let hear without it. Hold on, let me mute the bass. It's very slight, there's only 17 samples. You may not even want to bother with that at all, but it just tightens it up that a little bit. So the next up, the place to look for would be your snare top and your snare bottom. just the same again. I've used this auto align, and as you can see in this time 207 samples. You definitely want to tighten that up working with your snares. First, just deciding who's going to rule the low end can be quite tricky at times, and if you find that neither is really standing out or feeling that neither would be better down there, it's just a case of carving in and out of making room for the kick drum where you want it to be heard, making room for the bass when you want that to be heard, and that's just done with EQ. Our next issue when coming to drums that we need to consider is bleed. Now, what do I mean by bleed? Well, if I play this snare, as you can hear, there's cymbals and everything involved there. If I move it along, there we can hear the toms. So you have to decide when listening back to your drum kit, do you want the bleed? Do you like the sound that's coming through? You know, me personally, everybody has their own ideas, and it is quite genre specific as well. But for me personally, I don't want any bleed on my kick drum or on my snare, because I guarantee 99% that I'm going to do some processing on there. And if I'm doing any boost with EQ, especially in the upper regions, then I'm going to be raising up the sound of the bleed from the hi-hat and the bleed from cymbals coming through. And even in this case here, we're getting bleed from the toms coming through. And so when I want to carve in a nice snare drum, I don't want to be bringing in the sounds of other kits. So definitely I don't want any bleed on my kick drum or on my snare. So there's lots of ways of doing that. One of the newest ways, one of the easier ways I've found, if I just go down here and bring this up, is this Drumatom. It's actually quite easy to use. It's a suppressant, a bleed suppressant plugin. It can be quite expensive, I suppose, so definitely one to save up for. But simply how this works is, as you can see here, this is basically what you get. And with this focus, you just turn that up until you're focused in. It's cut the bleed out of the bass drum, for instance, or your snare, and you're just getting a clean, good snare. And with the fine tune, you use it to bring the bleed back in enough where you're getting as natural a sound as possible. And that's it. You've just two knobs to work with here. The focus, where you're trying to define that sound of the drum on its own and cut out the bleed, and the fine tune, where you just bring in the bleed back again, just enough and no more to give you the fullest sound that you can get without all those other instruments coming in on your mix. So that's those 3 points. Next up, what I'll do is I'll just show you the processing that I have done on these drums and flick all the inserts on and off, and you can see what you think of what I've done so far. So back to the beginning, play the drums without processing, and then I'll use our all on button, activate all inserts, and I have a bit going on the master bus as well, but it's really only a bit of compression and doesn't really overly affect the sound of the drums. So let's listen to those drums again on processed, and then I'll bring in all the inserts. Bring in the inserts. Take them back out. Back in. Okay, now as I say, I'm not going to show specific settings because obviously, there's no point, because these drums were recorded in a certain way, and the drums you're going to get will not be recorded the exact same way, using the same mics, same mic pre's, same drum kit even. Even that drum kit not even being tuned properly can throw you off, and you'll find you'll have to do more EQ moves to get what you think or what sounds in your ears like a snare or like a kick. This is where we fall down compared to what we would call pros, our celebrity mixers like Andrew Sheps, Mr. Chris Lloyd, and all the rest of them, Dave Pinsato. The reason is they know what kick drum sound and they know what snare sound goes with what certain genre of music. So they can just quickly throw on their EQs and stuff and get to where that snare needs to be, and they know, without even having to play it back on the track, that is the snare sound that they need. Whereas you and I, without this prior knowledge, would struggle. We're thinking, yep, I like the sound of that snare. Then we play it back on the full track and that snare completely disappears. So it's just all comes with repetition, like everything else when you're learning. Repetition, you learn what works, and if you find something that worked really well for you, well then you'll implement that again and try it on a different track. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't, but that's what everybody else is doing. You watch any of these celebrity mixers, as we so call them, and they're doing the same thing as you. The only difference, as I say, between you and them is experience. I know that may be a bit disingenuous for them, but that's basically what it comes down to. They know what a drum sound needs to be to fit a certain track, whereas we're scrabbling around in the dark ever so much, trying to make it sound what we think would fit, only to find that we've got it wrong and we need to start over. Just a few thoughts there. So we've touched on deciding who will rule the low end. Will it be our kick drum? Will it be our bass guitar? Our phase and our timing. Again, we can use plugins like Auto Align, and I've downloaded a wee demo here. Let me see on the bass, and this is the far more expensive one, Auto Align by Sound Radix. Bit more difficult to use because you need to do send and receives on these, and when you read the manual, and even when you look at videos on YouTube, you're still a bit lost as to how to use this thing. Here we're supposed to set our noise floor, trying to zone in on the sound of something, and then we can just choose our time adjustment with just delay, or we can get it to check for delay and polarity or phase. It will flip the phase if two mics are out. In this case, what we have here, as you can see, is a bass DI and a bass amp, and without a doubt these two are going to be out of phase because the bass DI is direct. It has less of a path to travel, whereas a bass amp, you think about it, it has to go from the bass cabinet to the microphone to the mic pre to the desk, whereas the DI is more likely just plugged straight into the preamp of the desk. So let me just click on this one to see. Yeah, 21 samples it adjusted it by. But as I say, I found this a lot more awkward to use, and I'll be honest, it may be the top one for doing things, but I didn't particularly like it. And that's it, isn't it? We just find what plugins we like and what suits us. When it comes to EQs, I prefer EQs that don't really have a visual aspect, So whenever we come back, if you look at my snare here, I've put an Andrew Sheps on it. Why? Because I'm used to being around analog equipment most of my days. Now I'm just a bedroom producer like yourself, actually in a kitchen. And, these make sense to me because I've heard what the real thing sounds like, and so I just like to use these. I know what they do. Rather than, let me see what else we have here. Yeah, FabFilter Pro, which is an excellent EQ. But here, we get caught up looking at these nice EQ curves, and sometimes you're not even sure what they mean, So I prefer that. Even the SSL channel, where you're just moving knobs and faders and trying to find that sound that sounds good to you, that suits the music that you're working on, and that's it. I mean, realistically, if you think of mixing, it's all about balance. And all we're doing is moving knobs and moving faders and trying to find a nice balance so that instruments can be heard when they need to be heard. There's room for everything on the track so that everything has a kind of a place. Then volume levels, we raise those faders, we lower those faders, and we just try to get a nice balance. That's mixing in a nutshell. So I don't think there's much else I can go into as regarding drums. I think we've covered it all. Other thing quite popular is putting a reverb on your snare. In this case, I've chosen this one from SoftTube. You can use anything. Use the one that comes with Studio One. I mean, I would say to you this: please don't get hung up on plugins, because none of these things sound like the real thing, despite what people would say and the claims that would be made. Look, here's a CLA 76 by Waves, but I can tell you now, it doesn't sound like an 1176. And despite what people say about the UAD stuff being far superior, I can tell you as well that 1176, even the newer versions have done, does not sound like a real 76. How could we use an analogy that a word processor, say Microsoft Word, is the same as a typewriter? They both do the same thing, but a typewriter is completely different. It's real. Whereas these things are virtual and are just basically mathematical equations running with a nice graphical user interface to make us think that we're using an 1176. But on the other hand of that, these things have use. We just don't want to be using them as we do in the analog world, because it doesn't work. What you have to do is rethink and say to yourself, I'm in a digital realm, and the settings I used to use in the analog world may not work in the digital realm because it's totally different. So just use things differently. That's all I would say. Don't get caught up in the plugins, because it just distracts you from your mixing, and that's where it's all about. Because if we listen here, let me see if I can get this whole song playing. And I'll take the drums in and out. And I love this Activate All inserts. Been crying out for it for ages, because you could be working on these drums for a couple of hours thinking you're creating the best drum sound since John Henry Bonham and Glenn Jones technique. But truth be told, you could have went off on a tangent and made things even worse. So wait till you hear this. Oh, bass guitar. Right, let's take out the processing. Let's add it back in. So as you can see, and here I should say, personally I think I like the snare before I've done my processing on it. Let me listen again. So, but that could be coming about from the gate that I've put on. On this occasion, I used this gate to try and suppress the bleed coming through from other instruments. So if I do that, bring up my snare and have that playing, and I take off that reverb. And let me bring that up a bit so that you can hear it. As you can hear, just the snare. and there's the bleed. Now, the thing about these is this, that people struggle with these trying to set a gate, and I have to say, they are quite tricky to do. I do struggle a bit myself sometimes. The reason being is that as you move this, let me see, let me go back to the start. If we take that off, with the bleed we have the full sound of the snare. Now if I bring on the gate, we're kind of losing something off that snare. Now the idea is to bring in your release and up it, and we're trying to grab as much of that snare sound as we can get without too much of the bleed making its way through. As you can see, between hits, what we want is this returning almost to zero. Let me go back to start. And sort of you work with your release to try and grab that snare sound without getting the bleed in. But you want this to kind of be almost heading towards zero again between snare hits. As you can hear, we're getting a little bit of bleed. Take the gate out. We hear the hi-hat. And we're only getting a few hits of the hi-hat. And that's why a lot of people don't like gating. Some people will use strip silence. But again, it can cut off transients as well. And the idea with a gate is simply this. We want to grab that initial hit with our attack, so a fast attack, so we can grab it as quickly as possible. And we want that gate to stay open just long enough till the end of the first snare hit and you get the next snare hit without getting too much bleed in. And that in lies the skill that's required. And that would be working with your release then, going towards a sort of faster release, and trying to capture as much as that snare without the bleed. And that is the problem. Again, a lot of people don't like gates. A lot of people don't like strip silence either. It's all down to you. It's what works in the track. If you find you're killing your snare with your gate, then you either need to readjust it or maybe do without it. Maybe try strip silence instead then. You know, there's lots of other techniques, but these are the main two, and they either work or they don't. Sometimes you'll just have to let it go and let the bleed come in, and then you have to be more careful when it comes to using EQ, because you don't want to be boosting any of the bleed coming through, and that also causes problems. So many decisions to be made when it comes to doing drums, but this is the challenge we have, and this is the thing we've set ourselves. We want to learn how to mix, and we want to get stuck in and learning drums. What I do normally, because you know, you need to refresh your mind as to what is your favourite snare drum sound, what is your favourite kick drum sound, how do you like to hear cymbals going, do you like lots of high-end splashing around, or do you want it more controlled? These are decisions you need to make. So I would listen to some of my favourite tracks before I come to mix. Maybe spend 15 minutes just listening to some of my favourite songs. And I'm studying, say I'm coming to mix drums. I'm listening to the drums on those tracks. Now, obviously they're not going to be identical to the drums I've been sent. These could have been just recorded in a basement, which you know, with drums on my favourite songs, probably recorded in hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment in a $1 million studio somewhere, maybe New York or LA or something like that, who knows, or Abbey Road, you know, who knows. So things are always changing, but if you can get an idea, you go, I love that snare sound. and then you can work on the snare that you've been sent and trying to get that same sound, and maybe it'll work for the track that you've been sent as well. So there's a lot of things to consider, but I think we've covered most of them. Deciding who will rule the low M, your phase and timing, your bleed, do you want that bleed, do you not want the bleed, your kick drum, you've got an in and an out. Sometimes for your kick drum in is on the beater head, that's the head that the paddle will be bouncing off, and moving a microphone closer inside the drum and further out is dependent on genre as well. That's something that has to be learned too. The kick out, as I say, it can be on the resonant head, which is the head on the outside of the kick drum, and that is the one that has usually the oomph, the full power of the kick drum. And so definitely you want to be getting that. And there's various other things. There's resonators that may be used. There's subs and stuff like this. All kinds of crazy stuff. But whenever you get these multi-tracks, here we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have about 10 tracks here on our drums. And that's not a lot compared to some, believe it or not. And it's up to you to decide what to use and what not. I mean, if we were doing the Glenn Jones technique, let's get that off, we would simply have our overheads, our kick, and our snare. And we would only have a kick in. Oh, hold on. We only have a kick in, a snare top microphone, would have an overhead which would be over the snare, looking down the snare, and then we would have our fourth mic would be over to the side of the floor tom, looking across the kit towards the snare. And what we do is we make sure that from the center of the snare to the one just over the floor tom, and the center of the snare to the one hanging over the kit up above it, looking down on the snare, that those distances are the same to try and minimize phase issues. And this is what the Glenn Jones, let me turn off the processing as well. This is what it would be, just a 4-mic kit. Now, obviously this wasn't recorded using the Glenn Jones technique. It's probably just 2 overheads overlooking the kit, one to the left and one to the right. But as you can hear, from just 4 mics on a kit, you can pick up the whole sound of that kit. And then with a kick in mic and a snare top mic, you can blend those in to the overheads. And I mean, this technique was used in John Henry Bonham, and I think a lot of people would say that is like some of the greatest drum sounds that we all love and are so longing to create in our own mixes, although not exactly always specific to the genre we're working in. I think some songs would definitely not suit John Henry Bonham drums. But it's just to show you that there's so many variables with drums. As I say, there's no point me showing you settings, because it will change recording how the drums were recorded. So I hope that helps you a bit to understand drums. A lot of people start on the overheads. Then you would bring in your kick drum, bring in your snare, and if you start with these 4 microphones and you get a little balance going, before you start bringing in other things like toms. Now, toms are also another thing quite difficult to do. The reason is that usually they're quite thin, and we end up boosting quite a lot of lows and trying to pick up the resonant head as well sometimes, and just trying to create them and make them larger than life. Usually the toms is how most people would do them in a mix. because sometimes they come quite thin sounding. Let's see if I can give you an example just before we head off. Toms. Yeah, have these pulled down a lot. Let me put that up. You know, very thin sounding. Now if I turn on the two EQs I've got going, turn on the EQs, and again I've gated these, trying to cut out the bleed of the other kit because I'm boosting so much on these EQs. If for those interested, there we go. That's mad looking, isn't it? Absolutely mental looking. But these are some of the things you have to do. You're pulling out these frequencies and boosting here around the 100 mark, just trying to find the body of that tom. As you can see, these two here, see them poking up as it's hit, and that's the snare. There you go. Trying to boost those on the floor tom. Again, picking out the high points of it and giving them a little boost. But like I say, you do what you have to do with EQ. Sometimes it looks absolutely mental, like you've just lost your mind, but you do what you need to do to get that sound. And as long as it sounds good with the rest of the mix brought in, you know, initially you're working in solo here, but you do need to keep bringing it back in and out. Make sure you can hear your kick drum, make sure you can hear that snare, because it's the kick and the snare that drive songs along. We all love to hear that good thump coming out of our speakers. We need a nice snare, snappy and loud, that just keeps that beat and keeps us interested in songs. So hopefully that will help. Just adding a few things into the mix rather than saying this is how to mix drums. So thank you for joining me. I hope you found this helpful and insightful, and I'll catch you in the next video. Happy mixing. Thank you.